Hey everyone, welcome back. Latest video, and this one's a funny one because I connected with Jen earlier in the day, and I was thinking, hey, you know what? There's not that much to talk about this week. Like, just got a couple of things. I say, hey Jen, and then she just starts going this, that. So we actually ended up with a longer list. So Jen, we were heavy on China content this week, and this wasn't planned. We didn't coordinate this in any way, but we ended up just kind of getting a bunch of stuff related to China. We do have some other stuff in the bank. We've got some stuff on COVID. We've got some stuff on carbon. We've got some stuff on childcare. We're kind of working our way through all of it. But what we ended up kind of just, makes a function of it, I guess, is we got a bunch of China stuff. Let's just run a bunch of China stuff. We got some interesting feedback from a reader, which sort of aligns with something you and I were recently talking about, the idea that covering China is some sort of gateway into anti-Asian racism, which is, to put it mildly, bullshit.
Yeah, completely bullshit. It's utterly jello-headed bullshit. It's a thing that you particularly see on the. Now, firstly, I would say, yes, there is a subsection of society that deals with anti-Asian discrimination. People of Asian descent have suffered discrimination, especially in like street harassment of late. It's a problem. Particularly when you look at Canada's history, internment camps and all the rest, especially, I mean, I'm from BC, so I can tell you anti-Asian discrimination is a thing. It's absolutely a thing. So I understand the good intentions where a lot of this stuff comes from, but bluntly, it's jello-headed bullshit. When we are talking about China, we are not talking about Asian people as a whole. Very obviously, we are talking about the actions of an increasingly authoritarian imperialistic power known as the Chinese Communist Party that is increasingly acting in ways in the geopolitical space that most progressives would recognize as being immoral and illegitimate if a Western country were doing it. So I just think it's worth responding to that criticism and saying, look, we just reject the premise of this criticism, and here's why. And just laying out our thoughts on this. And I mean, this came up for me also, is like, so Chris Alexander did a great piece for us talking about sort of issues with the rule of law in China and what we can expect and not expect. Chris Alexander, of course, is a highly credible figure, well-respected diplomat, former minister in the Harper cabinet. And, CP did a story about him criticizing a Chinese Canadian senator. And framed it in such a way that it was like Christopher Alexander's fault for all like the Twitter harassment that the Chinese Canadian senator received. And I'm sitting here going like, no, no, it's perfectly legitimate for Chris Alexander to call out somebody in a position like that for behaving in ways that are contrary to Canadian interests without being blamed for absolutely nonsense Twitter harassment. Like we can't operate under a space where we are incapable of calling out some of these problems, because I mean it's increasingly becoming clear that there are some problems that need to be addressed here in our societies and institutions. So no, I think that we need to sort of lay that out. And what amazes me about, especially on the progressive side, the inability to sort of identify this, is that these are often coming from the same kinds of people who will go to the ends of the earth to say that you can call out Israel without being anti-Semitic, which you can, that is correct, but they can't seem to make the same kind of distinction for the difference between people of Chinese descent and the Chinese Communist Party. This is nonsense. This is, like I said, it's jello-headed nonsense.
Something that we like to do here at the line, and something we have carved out as part of our mission, is calling out this kind of bullshit. And one of the things that is hobbling us as a society right now is when smart people pretend to be stupid, because being stupid and pretending not to understand what people are really talking about forces them into conversations they don't want to have. So they either reject the premise of the question or they pretend not to have understood the question. Attacking China and not Chinese people, you are right, is identical to attacking Israel or Israel policies and not being anti-Semitic. But there's going to be groups on both sides. And yeah, I went there. I said both sides, who are going to continue to weaponize this. People in Israel's quarter, generally including me, I'm pretty pro-Israel, but I'm not universally pro-Israel because they screw up sometimes. there will be people on my side of this who will continue as a point of convenience to treat valid criticism of Israeli domestic or defense policy as anti-Semitic, just like as there'll be a whole whack of people pretending to be idiots on the other side because they don't want to talk about Chinese policies, so they'll talk about anti-Asian racism instead. And you would raise something interesting as well, which is that what China is doing is objectively bad. And if we were to just say, hey, let's do a straw poll, concentration camps, pro or con, like people would go, con, I think. Or if we talk about, what about rounding up religious minorities and putting them in camps where the men are tortured and the women are raped? Where do you stand on that one? I think we'd probably get a pretty good opposed verdict on that one. But as you had said, this is a private conversation you had a couple of days ago. What this is going to do is it's going to put people who are very, very used to thinking like the West is just sort of like a catch-all phrase for all that is evil in the world. Oops,
well,
now we're the good guys.
Well, not only that, but I mean, look, if your prevailing narrative here is that Western liberal democracies are actually just a hypocritical front for white supremacy, the whole bad actions of non-Western countries becomes a real problem for you. And so what you've seen especially on the far left, is an attempt to sort of minimize what's happening to the Uyghurs, or just say, well, it's not actually that bad. They're not actually concentration camps, Matt, or this has been the West, the warlike imperial West is really just making this stuff up. It's all propaganda, blah blah blah. Yep. Blah blah blah. Despite the fact that a lot of this stuff has been very widely and credibly reported, there's no serious dispute about this.
By credible organizations or people.
By credible organizations, like this is not
human
like
rights organizations
is making, like the CIA is not making this shit up. Yeah. I mean, the other problem in all this is the assumption that the West is actually just setting the groundwork for some kind of war, as if America wants war with China. That is so ahistoric. Like, the problem with that whole theory is that for the last, 15, 20 years, the West has been operating in like a Francis Fukuyama style delusion that fundamentally believed that if we left China alone and it continued to prosper and do well, that it would liberalize and all of its totalitarian tendencies would go away. Because of course we know that with free capitalistic markets, societies ultimately become like us. That is actually the delusion under which we've been operating under, and it's only in the last. I mean, even Harper was operating under that delusion, which when we were dealing with talking about increasing our financial ties to China, and it's also why I don't give the Trudeau government that much hell about this, because this was the general consensus among like the economists set, and it was only in the last couple of years really when people started to go, oh, maybe that's not inevitable. And like the whole conversation around this has changed. So we've gone from thinking of China as being like slightly problematic future ally that will come around in time, to all of a sudden realizing, oh no, like this is a state that is acting very, very badly and inappropriately. And as it's becoming more financially powerful, it's actually flexing its geopolitical muscle in ways that are frankly inappropriate and terrifying. So like I just think it's worth laying that all out and just saying, look, the reason why we aren't going to hold back on the criticism of China is because China doesn't deserve it. But let's be real clear here. We're not talking about Chinese Canadians. We're not talking about Chinese people. We're not talking about Asian people. We're talking about the actions of a government.
It's funny because I'd be interested in figuring this out. I haven't looked that closely at this yet. It would be interesting to actually go back, or maybe we get someone to do it. I wonder when the pivot moment was. I wonder, because you're right, there was sort of right across the Western world, at the elite level anyway, and the foreign policy establishments, most of the political parties, this idea that engagement with China would bring China around, because we read our Cold War history textbooks, and that's kind of what eventually happened with the Soviet Union, right? The problem is it didn't quite work with Russia either. No, but I mean, the problem is that China also read those books and said, nah, not for us. So China has intelligently used the benefits of diplomatic and economic engagement with the West to reinforce the I mean, again, I say China, I mean the Chinese government, to reinforce their own power. What is interesting though, and I'm not an expert in this, I'm just a guy who's reading about this, China's having rolling blackouts. They're curtailing industrial production. Some of their very, very large real estate holding companies and property development companies are defaulting on loans. There's a lot going on in China that I do not understand well enough to fully appreciate, but I'm kind of having the sense that maybe, it's funny. Back in 2008, I have this very distinct memory of golfing. And I was with my dad and I was with my brother-in-law, my sister's husband. And it was the first time we had a conversation about like credit default swaps and bad mortgages, Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, things like that. And we were maybe about a month ahead of the panic and kind of going, we should probably like read about this. Like we should probably get dialed in. I kind of have some feelings that remind me of that, about the fact that China apparently does not have enough fuel to get through the winter. So we could be looking at an interesting couple of months here. Anyway, we'll tie all this together, put a bow around it. One of the other things I just want to mention, Jen, I don't want to even get that deep into this, and I don't know if I want to even talk about it in the dispatch. I'll get your take on this. Trudeau vacationing in Tofino has been the story. It's for people who watched our video last week. You and I were being coy. We were saying, oh, yeah, maybe some other things that we might talk about.
We hadn't confirmed that last Thursday, though it was a bubbling story. So
my friend Brian Passafume, reporter for Post Media,
he's been killing it lately. Like, good on Brian, man. He's so good.
He's been killing it, and he's an aviation geek. And he had popped me a message basically saying, "Hey, RCAF 01 is making a beeline for the Prime Minister's vacation spot." You and I talked about this just before we recorded our video, and we were both like, "Would he be that dumb though? Would he? No, he wouldn't pin a huge part of his legacy on reconciliation, declare a national day of observance, and then fuck off for the beach on the day. He wouldn't possibly be that dumb." So we were like, okay, Brian, like we'll get back to you on that one. We didn't necessarily accept that was going to happen. It happened. Here we are. We've been talking about it all week. Is there anything left to say about this? We did include it in our dispatch. I'll be honest.
I kind of feel like, no. I actually think there's nothing really more to say.
What about the continuing media fallout and criticism of it?
Who cares? I mean, a bunch of TrueAnon Twitter losers are angry at the media for making the Trudeau look bad. Who cares? I think we've got to stop. We've got to stop taking this stuff seriously. We've got to stop taking Twitter seriously. It's such a gamified space. It's not a reflection of general population, general sentiment. It is. I mean, we've described it between ourselves as occupied territory at this point, and I think it is. I don't think either of us at this point is honestly expecting honest critique or engagement from Twitter. We're both there because, I mean, we kind of need to be, but I would burn the whole thing into oblivion if I could, which brings me to the second dispatch item: Facebook down, burn it to the ground.
Years ago, I disengaged from Facebook. I still have a Facebook profile, and I view it almost as a personal life archive. Like you can see my kids growing up as my hairline evaporates. Like you just gotta you go back through the pictures. My hair gets fuller and more lush, and my kids get a little smaller and smaller. If not for that,
suck the life out of you. It's amazing.
Well, I mean, life does that eventually. I'll tell you this. I have no interest in Facebook whatsoever. Like, if I can figure out a way to back out entirely, I will. And I've already minimized my footprint there. I have like putting new status updates, putting new content on Facebook is something I stopped doing years ago. Kind of when there'd been the first wave of revelations about some of what Facebook was up to. Now, I was a very early adopter of Facebook because my then girlfriend was Canadian, but going to school in the US. And the American universities had Facebook first. And it was like a thing. So she had told me, hey, has Facebook come to Canada yet? I have this specific memory of being like, what the fuck's a Facebook? So I was sort of aware of it. And then when it got to my school, I was the sixth person to join, like the entire, because it was all university based at first. It wasn't open to the broader public.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I was the sixth person at my school to have it. So the entire community was 5 other people plus me. So I was on it very early, used it kind of as everyone did. Eventually My grandmother got it. Like, so like the experience changed. Then it became this huge thing. And a few years ago, I'm just like, you know what? I'm done with this thing. Didn't miss it when it crashed. I didn't miss the Messenger app. Like,
Well,
Facebook is now an ecosystem of technologies.
yeah, and also the other thing I would say is this, Twitter is kind of evolving that way for me as well. It's like I need it for DMs and I need it to like keep track of what the conversations are, but I've just increasingly think it's just not a useful platform. I mean, there's an observation you made here, and I mean, there was a couple of podcasts by Sam Harris who I occasionally listen to, and he made this really interesting thought experiment. And I don't know if he stole it from somewhere else, but I'll steal it from him. But he said, imagine all technologies are like little balls, like little ping pong balls in a jar. Every technology that humans can reach is like a ping pong jar at the jar. And as you reach the top, more technologies are potentially open to you. So far, all of the ping pong balls that we've pulled have been white ping pongs. They've been good technologies that have largely furthered and advanced our quality of life and our capacity as a species. Imagine a couple of those ping pongs, though. Imagine they're dark ping pongs.
Hmm.
Imagine that a couple of those ping pongs are the kinds of technologies that will inevitably lead to us to self-destruct. For example, massive advances in biotech. Okay, massive advances in biotech sounds great until you realize that every high school will be able to create its own COVID virus in 20
Yeah.
years. Right? I mean, if that's the scenario, what guarantee or what thought could we possibly have that there's not going to be one psychotic high school student who, instead of taking a gun to school, decides to, create an Ebola virus and take out, half the eastern seaboard? Like these kinds of technologies are like every other technology, rapidly filtering down to the system and becoming so accessible and so widely accessible that it really begs some questions. What if not all technologies are good? And I sort of think we're coming to the conclusion that social media might be one of the dark balls. So like we didn't quite realize it at first.
Yeah.
It's all benign and interesting at first, but now we're starting to realize the ripple effects of social technology. Maybe it's just an adjustment phase. Maybe we're just going through a disruption phase. Maybe we redevelop new kind of like informational immune systems. Maybe all this stuff happens. Or maybe we've just drawn one of the dark balls.
I think it was David Moskrop, who's a Canadian academic and author and writes the Washington Post. I think it was him who said recently that with hindsight, maybe we shouldn't have invented a technology that was like being constantly screamed at by strangers in the supermarket. And which sounds about right. What came to mind was something I had read years ago, and I've told you this before. In say the 1950s, and this is not some rose-colored glasses view of history, right? Because obviously there were a lot of marginalized and forgotten people in the 1950s. But imagine a 1950s middle-class neighborhood where your neighbor to the left and the right are demographically very similar to you. You probably read the same daily newspaper. There's only a couple of radio stations in town, and you probably listen to them. You probably cheer for the same sports teams. Like you would have been very demographically similar because the content you could consume was very limited. Couple of TV stations, one daily newspaper, a few magazines. There was a broad cultural similarity. And then we went through this incredible Renaissance period, right? Where right now, I'm a classic rock guy who likes hockey and sci-fi novels. My neighbor to my left, for all I know, it likes, Aussie rules football, classical music, and only reads German poetry. Like we have this incredible diversity in available content. And then that was fine because we were all living in private lives. I had no idea what my neighbor liked in terms of music, what his political views were, what his views on social issues were. And then the Facebook comes along. We all add each other because we're friendly and we're nice people. And all of a sudden I'm like, you know what? My neighbor's actually an asshole because like I thought he was just like this normal guy, but wow, he likes all the wrong political causes and he cheers for the wrong sports team and he's liking all these posts by this person I find reprehensible. It took away the soothing and comforting bubbles of anonymity that you had even with your neighbors, even people in your social, like people you worked with. You'd spend 8 hours a day with them, but you might not know that they're a huge Ted Cruz fan. or that they are liking all the video posts of the comedian who told that really uncouth joke that resulted in the latest Twitter scandal du jour, right? This stuff has forced us all into a very small room together where we can't hide our idiosyncrasies.
Yeah, and also the other problem with a lot of this is Twitter is a chat room. Twitter is a conversation, right? And so like it's really easy. Like imagine every conversation that you ever have with other people in any public environment were suddenly transcribed, right? How
and
easy would
indexed
it
and
be
searchable.
and indexed and searchable? How easy would it be to take one thing you had said in a conversational environment completely out of context 5 years later and then attack people on it? I mean, I remember having this kind of a moment when somebody had pointed out the fact that I had said something positive about Ted Cruz, which is you bring it up as it reminded me. What was out of context is that what I was saying was Ted Cruz would be a better choice for Republican president than Donald Trump. And I think that he would have been. I was actually an Andrew Yang supporter. I would have been like Andrew Yang all the way. But I did, in the context of like a conversation with someone, be like, at that moment, no, Ted Cruz would have been a better choice than Donald Trump. Ted Cruz, for whatever his problems, has a fundamental respect for the Constitution. I think he would have been a less dangerous choice for the Republicans. And this was a moment when it was basically Ted Cruz versus Donald Trump. But somebody 3 years later can take that conversation snippet out of context and make
Oh, look at Jen Gerson, the Ted Cruz supporter.
Look at Jen Gerson, the Ted Cruz supporter. This is the problem. It's like you can't actually have a conversation with anybody in a context where anyone can take a sentence that you've written out of context in order to destroy you. Like it's just, like I said, maybe this is just a transitional phase and we are just getting used to the new social norms. Maybe this is something like people are just going to stop taking these kinds of attacks seriously. But the end result is that like I maybe there's something to be said in the dispatches like, hey, I think we have to start considering the possibility that we've pulled the dark ball from the jar.
Yeah, and we're dealing with just not human behavior here. So first of all, social media
it's not ordinary. Well, no, it is human behavior. It's the darkest form of human behavior.
But it's also algorithms. Like we have designed systems that are, we're talking about, kind of like I said before, all of a sudden we're all in a room with our neighbors all the time. We're all in a room with our neighbors, and there's this guy called Algorithm who's walking around and going, hey Matt, come over here and meet Doug because you'd think he's an asshole. And I'm designed to go out and generate conflict because other people will be really, really interested in that. I was just doing a bit of reading over the last couple of days. And look, everyone's had some experience like this. Since Tuesday, and we're filming this on Thursday evening, I've been reading about shipping delays in the Port of Los Angeles, because you and I are looking at some supply chain stories we're hoping to bring on to the line. And there's a big bottleneck of shipping containers at the Port of Los Angeles, which is causing a knock-on effect through supply chains everywhere. So you won't be able to see this, Jen. I'm not sharing my screen, but let me just go check up the top of my Google ad feeds right now. Audi downtown Toronto. They want me to buy a car. Okay. Container terminals, shipping containers for sale. The algorithms are manipulating the content. And so it is often the worst of human behavior, but we have designed a system with perverse incentives that is bringing out the worst in human behavior. I don't know. Maybe we fix the algorithms. Some people we know have just quit social media, and we have to communicate them.
And it doesn't seem to have hurt them.
Well, have you met one person who has quit Facebook or Twitter and misses it?
I mean, I've known a lot of people who tried to quit and came back because the whole system is so gamified that they're addicted. I mean, the only reason why I haven't quit, honestly, is because I think for the line, it's necessary to try to continue to grow the line by exposing people to content that we produce.
It's actually interesting. Talk for 10 more seconds. I bet I can see.
You can see what? What can you see? Like
traffic source.
One terrible, regrettable thing that I've written lately?
No, that would be a long list. Twitter is one of our larger sources of traffic.
Yeah, it's not something that we can totally give up just yet. But anyway, side note, do we want to talk about the supply chain issues?
You know what? Yes, but I don't have much to say about it yet. I had tried to line up some interviews this week, and I've only gotten one so far, and it was preliminary. I would rather hold fire on this and then do a proper job of it probably next week.
Well, and I also would probably like to get all of my flower seeds and Christmas toys stocked up before I start raising the alarm on this.
Um, yeah, Christmas toys, you might already be too late.
Yeah, true.
Um,
Okay, so
it's
let's.
funny you mentioned that, but it was the first person to really put a bug in my ear about this about 6 weeks ago was a guy who's a toy importer who said that it used to cost him $3,500 to bring a standard size shipping container from the port of Shanghai across the Pacific, unload at the port of Vancouver, and train or truck it to his warehouse in the Greater Toronto area. $3,500 US and about a month lead time. Now it's 6 months lead time for 35,000. Sorry, 25,000 US.
Yeah, well, I'm
So
trying to furnish our new house, and let me tell you, you can't get anything before next year. Um, and also, apparently, there's a blackout in Toronto right now. I was talking to John Wright, and he was saying that half of Toronto is blacked out. Anyway, last thing on my list is I think that we should give props to the Globe and Mail for sending Mark McKinnon to Kabul.
yeah, we also wish him all the best.
Yeah, I mean, like,
we're not giving them props for putting Mark in danger. We're just giving them props.
No. No. I mean, we've been critical of the Canadian media, particularly the publicly funded Canadian media, for essentially not doing that, because as dangerous as that job is on occasion, it is the job, and what do you want to do? But the Globe, which, I mean, we didn't blame the Globe for not sending a video, because most private organizations
Oh, no one did.
don't have the, yeah, no, well, most private organizations don't have the cash to do it anymore. So I think that they deserve some props. I mean, back in the day, they really owned the Afghanistan file, particularly when Graham Smith was their lead correspondent down there. I think Graham is working for the UN now. So I think it's fantastic that they sent Mark McKinnon, and hope he does well. And I think that, like, props where props are due, man.
Was Mark the first Canuck to get back in since all the
I
stuff went
suspect so.
nuts?
I'd want to check. I'd want to check to see if AP had managed to send somebody. So,
Well,
I mean, for a Canadian paper, yes.
yeah. I mean, I don't know if it's the first Canadian citizen to go back in, but for the first Canadian outlet. So we had written, we'd run a piece. We didn't write it. Was it Peter Menzies who wrote it?
It was Menzies who wrote it.
It's this is when Afghanistan was going down, spiraling down about a month and a half ago. Peter Menzies had written for us saying the CBC has sort of a special responsibility to be there because it's the only organization capitalized to do it. So the Globe beat the Mother Corp, huh?
Yeah, the Globe beat the Mother Corp. That's probably worth noting. I mean, there was one thing. I mean, sometimes we run things in line that I personally disagree with, and you personally disagree with, and that's fine. There's one thing I would note about the Menzies piece that I actually did disagree with, is that his conclusion was that part of the reason why they didn't send anyone was because they were navel gazing on their own internal diversity metrics. I mean, that's within the realm of fair comment. I don't necessarily agree with him on that point. I suspect there were other factors that were bigger at play.
Well, they were undoubtedly navel gazing at their own diversity metrics, but I think that's true every day.
That's true every day. Like, yeah. So I mean, yeah. There's it's one of those things where it's kind of like, okay, you have kind of a point in the sense that, like, when you are so institutionally focused on stuff that is fundamentally internal, it can be sometimes help you lose track of the fact that you're there to cover the goddamn news. First and foremost, you're there to cover the goddamn news. So it's important. All the diversity metrics and all those other kinds of broader social issues are really important. And like, you have to have these conversations internally, but not to the extent that you fundamentally lose track of your mandate, which is to cover the goddamn news. Cover the goddamn news. Anyway, so like, I was kind of torn on that one. I thought it was within the realm of fair comment. I thought maybe it was a bit of a gratuitous shot at the same time, but like, it wasn't my piece. It was Peter's piece, and that's fine. But fundamentally, like, they didn't cover the goddamn news. So fair play. And I think that they deserve some I think the Globe deserves some props for covering the goddamn news. And I think the CBC deserves to take its hits for not covering the goddamn news. What it is.
One other item on my list, and there's a gigantic question mark next to it. Is there anything to add about the situation in Alberta and Saskatchewan, or are we exactly where we were 7 days ago?
I think the case rates have peaked. I think our hospitalization rates have plateaued. So that is really good news. Now it's a question of how quickly the case rates and the hospitalization rates will decline what makes me somewhat hopeful about the situation is that we've managed to sort of get over the hump without imposing more lockdowns, which I think is a psychologically important thing to do, because it demonstrates that as a society you can use less invasive measures to manage the highs of the pandemic. So that's good. We're about to get a baby here, I think. Yeah, so I mean, I think that that's the thing, but at this point, I really don't want to say, hey, Alberta's peaked. It's
Okay,
just
well, you know what,
next,
we'll just keep
next
watching
week.
it then.
Yeah, next week, I think there will probably be something to say there, because if we can continue, like, if things can continue to improve, we're going to be clear sailing by Christmas. But I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll continue to watch that then. Yep, you know, that's funny. I mean, this is the second item on the list where we're deciding not to talk about it at the dispatch. As before, we will ping some of our buddies, and we will see if anyone else has anything they want to put into the dispatch. So viewers, listeners, if you're surprised to see something else in there it's not discussed, that's because someone else had an idea that we didn't. But right now we've got China, we've particularly got the Israel comparison you raised. We will not do Trudeau and Tofino. We will not do Alberta, Saskatchewan. We will do Facebook, and we will do props to the Globe. There's nothing in my neck of the woods, meaning Eastern Canada, right now that's of any particular interest, to be honest. And I would suggest, Jen, as well, we add a programming note that we will be off for Monday of next week because it's Thanksgiving. It's a long weekend.
And I'm making turkey. Okay, on that note, I think that's all we have to say. I want to discuss my column with you, which is 3/4 of a way done. But other than that, I have nothing to add for the dispatch, except how do you want to break it up? Do you want to do, I'll do China, you do Facebook, I'll do Globe?
To be honest, you seem more engaged on Facebook, and I think we're equally engaged on China. So why don't I do China, you do Facebook and Globe?
Okay, I might want to take a crack at China then when you're done with it.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll do that first. We'll probably put this thing out Friday evening. Anyway, let's wrap this thing up, and I will stop recording it so that we can talk about your column. Everybody, thanks again. Have a happy Thanksgiving. We'll be off on Monday. We will be back with you, though, Tuesday of next week, and we already have a ton of stuff in hand, so it'll be a busy week at the line next week. Take care of yourselves. We'll talk to you soon.